Hello, and welcome to YPO Presents Ask the Experts. I'm Matt Johson with the McFarlin Group here in Dallas, Texas. We're a developer and owner of seniors housing from active adult through skilled nursing. And I'm joined today by two business leaders and YPO members, Jonathan Gavshon and Danny Stricker, to discuss some market trends, innovations, and overall outlook for seniors living. So welcome, Jonathan and Danny.
Thank you,
for
Matt.
having us.
Jonathan, know you're joining us from Sydney, Australia, and CEO of Group Homes Australia, a for-purpose business offering care for people living particularly with dementia and Alzheimer's. But would you mind sharing a little bit about your business and your experience and background with the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So I lived in the US for a little bit. I started my career in investment banking at JP Morgan, and then saw my return back to Australia, and always knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. And that passion got sparked when my grandfather had dementia and didn't have the most fantastic experience in his care journey. And so started to look around for other options and ended up partnering with a phenomenal registered nurse who had an entrepreneurial spirit as well. And she went around the world to look for other ideas. And we started with the premise that if people want care or need care, they generally say they want to be at home. And so how can we stay true to that core value? And that's exactly what we've done. So we build traditional homes in traditional suburbs in Australia, in Sydney. And those homes care for people living with dementia. So there's anywhere from 6 to 10 people living in each home. And we currently have 25 homes and rapidly growing. And we see it as a real strong trend in terms of a better way for people to receive that care when they need it.
That's great. Thanks for sharing, Jonathan. I think your business model is very unique, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about that here during our event. Danny, co-founder and president of Chapters Living, and a new venture, again, another entrepreneurial venture started last year. Would you mind also sharing a little bit about your company, your vision, your background and experience with the audience?
Yeah, I'd love to. And so I entered in seniors housing actually to save up money to propose to my now wife. So I got a job as a caregiver my senior year of college and never had any desire before that to work in senior living, but have stayed in it ever since. Absolutely fell in love with it. Started my career doing sales and marketing for communities throughout St. Louis, and became an operator in 2009, and ran skilled nursing facilities, assisted living, as well as memory care communities and independent living, and worked for Ascension Healthcare for those in the States. Very large Catholic not-for-profit health system, mostly acute care hospitals and physician practice clinics. I operated and led a team over all of our senior living portfolio. So I started with them in 2011 and had various roles. I became our president of that organization in 2019. At that time, we had a little over 560 million of revenue across 55 sites of care across 11 states in the district. Always had a desire to start something new, and we started Chapters Living on August 15th of 2022, myself and two awesome partners, with a significant focus on the Midwest and a focus around providing Alzheimer's and dementia support in a very programmatic way where the environment supports the outcome, but really how we train our caregivers to respond and to teach them how to interact and ultimately drive quality of life with our residents is where we spend a lot of time operationally. So we've grown rather quickly in our 9 months or so of existence, and look forward to sharing some of our experience today.
Good. Thanks for sharing. I can already sense some themes with both of you as entrepreneurs. One being you've defined a niche and are focused on a particular niche. So, for those of you that don't know that are joining us live or on a recorded version, Jonathan, Danny, and myself are YPO members. YPO is a global leadership community of more than 34,000 chief executives in more than 150 countries, driven by the shared belief that the world needs better leaders and entrepreneurs and CEOs. One of those benefits of being a YPO member is the opportunity to connect with leaders like Jonathan and Danny that have conversations where we share and exchange ideas in a very confidential manner and emphasize and focus lifelong learning around business topics that create relationships, build stronger businesses, and really have a global focus with that. As we get started, I want to remind you, for those that are watching live, that you can post comments at the bottom of your screen or questions that we can address during and or after this live show. So, Jonathan, Danny, setting the stage for the audience, we have a wave of seniors, the senior tsunami, the graying of America, the age wave led by the baby boomers born 1946 to 1964. The oldest boomer is 77 years old, and many seniors are beginning to access and think about that next step for their parents. In fact, my parents are 80 and 81, and I am now becoming an adult child, being a owner of seniors living, seniors housing, and making those key decisions for my parents and understanding the challenges that goes with it from the adult child or children's side of that. So many things, including where seniors or our customers move from, and what level of care they may decide to move into based on what they may need. So, Jonathan, I'll go to you first. From your perspective, what are seniors in Australia looking for in terms of seniors housing? How do your trends that you're seeing in your market area affect your business, and how you've kind of carved out your niche?
Yeah, look, Matt, that's a great question. And I think the thing that always strikes me is that a lot of the themes that you're talking about in the US and when we talk about or get closer to other markets, regardless of culture, regardless of geographic location, a lot of these themes are very similar and traverse the world. And that is that effectively, as you say, it's an aging population, and it's a challenge for us all as broader communities to think about how we effectively tailor care and choices as people age and enter that market. I think if I was to summarize three themes that I think people that we see, and hopefully this is a universal theme, some universal themes we see looking or needing care. The one is that people want to stay at home for as long as they possibly can. And this often means contracting a lot of care at home. And so we've seen a significant trend in the Australian market around people coming into care later and trying to stay as connected and supported at home for as long as possible. Now, that being said, that's not always possible in the journey of dementia or some of the other kind of care needs that people have. But I think staying at home for as long as one possibly can is one key theme. The second theme I'd mention is that lives are busy. And so you talk about your aging parents. Common theme is that sandwich generation. And so as we get busier, our kind of professions take hold, our families take hold. There is an element of isolation that happens for older members of the community. And that feeling of isolation can have a significant impact on someone's care trajectory. And so what we say is that while staying at home is often a strong preference, it's important to recognize that isolation is something that needs addressing and needs careful consideration, because sometimes moving into care of some form does actually cure or kind of have an impact on that isolation in a positive form. And the last thing I'd say is that baby boomers, but I'd say this is human nature, not just necessarily generationally specific, is that people want choice, dignity, and independence. So the notion that you age, and when you age, you need to go into some sort of environment that is a combination of a hospital meets a hotel meets a nursing home is no longer what that age group or any of us really want. And so it's ensuring that that choice, independence, and that dignity is preserved, regardless of whether someone's living at home or needing to move into a care environment.
Yeah, thank you. I would agree with your first point. We have seen it at our properties here in the US with more options for people to stay at home longer. They are moving in at an older age with more disease and disability, which has compressed our length of stay and really changed and challenged our business model a little bit. We've definitely seen that at our properties as the age has increased and people moving in at an older age. Danny, from your perspective, switching now to the Midwest
Yep.
uh, in the U.S., what are you finding that your customers and families are looking for in senior living properties?
So we focus a lot on that adult child and how we communicate and share information about how to find us. So we've spent a lot of time in our digital development and how we generate leads and share our solutions to the common challenges. I think the common challenges that Jonathan described are all similar to the states. I would say too, to add to his, we are seeing that kids, our age and above, just frankly do not have enough time to coordinate all the care required to stay at home, even though that there are a lot of solutions. And from a cost perspective too, we've seen, the rise of home care costs that frankly look like they're outpacing where our site costs are rising. So we see a lot of investment on our side and kind of being very transparent with the consumers on all things pricing and what to expect, and reinvest those dollars into the training of our caregivers for Alzheimer's and dementia.
I echo your thoughts too on the adult child, and I remember from some of our discussion with our community liaisons and sales teams or boots on the ground, which is we so often talk about the customer, the mom or dad, but we sometimes forget to um, ask about how the adult child is doing.
Right.
And this is maybe the one time in their life they're going to make a decision for the first person they ever loved, their mom or dad, and do
Yep.
this once in their life. And how are they doing with the emotions and how are they feeling? So
That's right.
appreciate the shift to the adult child and what are they looking for? And frankly, how are they feeling through this emotional journey? Um, so with that, Danny, as you mentioned, a lot of times it's a family decision with residents wanting to maintain independence, balancing when is the appropriate time to move mom or dad, where do we move? So from a business perspective, talk about kind of your sales teams. What are your
Yep.
current themes, priorities, and empowering your sales teams ultimately to address these issues?
Yeah, love it. We had our weekly call this morning with our sales team members, so have some fresh perspective on, what they're seeing and where they spend their time. And as I said earlier, we've really put a lot of time and money into our, as a startup, we get the advantage of taking a lot of lessons learned through COVID and weaving that into our digital presence and being very specific around how we promote and run ads out to the markets to drive leads. We've also spent a lot of time training our sales leaders in coordination with our CRM partner, which is Servium Care Network, is who we use, and they staff a contact center as well. So that way, when a family does call us, we do not miss that phone call and take the opportunity to explain what we do. But a lot of their time, is focused around 40% of it's out in the community and making sure that we have the right relationships with skilled nursing facilities, physicians, and others. And then 60% of the time is ideally touring qualified leads. And we teach our team members to listen as much as they can and interject, when necessary. And what they're finding is that as we can talk about the value that we provide in our programming, that's really ultimately what the kids want to know is, hey, I'm not just buying a room and board. I'm buying, care with, accountable outcomes that you're selling me. And we train our team members to focus their conversations around the how we do what we do and how we train and how we measure what success looks like. And we try to always give that feedback to the families.
Jonathan, you're focused on dementia communities. So I imagine customers and families are coming to you, maybe in a time of need and crisis, particularly if there's a incident that may result in the family making the decision to move mom or dad into a more secure facility. But talk to us a little bit about kind of your sales process, your sales function, and maybe best practices, or maybe leaving the audience with a golden nugget, if you will.
Sure, happy to. So we see two pathways that customers get to us, and to both your and Danny's point, we're very much engaging with the children rather than the person receiving the care, as much as we do during their care experience. But when it comes to the sales process, it's the children that are really making this decision. And the two pathways that people get to us is either those people that have received a diagnosis are the preparers in the world. They're the ones that want to know what's out there. They want to be ahead of a crisis and effectively come in before something significant happens. The alternative is the probably kind of more challenging position, which is when there's either been a fall or some sort of event that's led to a hospitalization, and we get the call from the hospital car park saying, we've just been advised by the social worker or by the discharge planner that going home is not a good idea and we need urgent care. And to be fair, we don't sit in judgment of either of those pathways, because what's right for each family is different and unique. But our team, very much to Danny's point, are there to listen and there to support and there to nurture. And that's something that we feel is a critical element to this process, because at the end of the day, whatever point these families are inquiring, they're in a level of crisis, they're in a level of possible guilt, they're in a stage of possible denial, and being able to effectively talk them through that process with our experience, showing that our experience does matter, and we have it, and it's deeply there, and that there's a deep care approach to the way we do things, really seems to translate in terms of being able to effectively move people through that sales cycle. And sometimes it does mean making a recommendation to go home. Sometimes it does mean not necessarily pushing the sale, but ultimately ensuring that the integrity of the recommendation is there for the person rather than just what's necessarily best for the sales of the business.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the financial side, and particularly labor, as labor generally at our properties represents the largest controllable cost. As we like to say, it's 70% of our controllable costs, or maybe 30 to 40% of our total expenses is labor. And if we only do one thing well, it should be labor. We don't want to step over dollars to collect dimes. We really need to do labor right. And labor during COVID was challenging, and it has not gotten better. There's a labor shortage, and there's really no easy solution for it. I think Seniors Housing Business did a recent survey of operators here in the U.S. and found that about 62% of the respondents felt like staffing and labor was the industry's biggest challenge to tackle. Danny, going to you, how have the labor shortages and higher expenses affected, your properties or seniors housing? And what is, one or two solutions that you're putting in place to really combat the labor challenge?
Yep, that's a daily conversation and focus for sure. And with the acquisitions that we've completed, you can imagine, a lot of the current conditions are strained around, the lack of labor, either in their practice and their process to recruit, retain, as well as from a pay practice view. So it's certainly, when we go into a new acquisition, usually labor is the first lever that we look at. And we see oftentimes how to kind of get the premium labor costs out, whether that's a third party agency or overtime. we've really focused a lot on cleaning up scheduling and being more flexible with our shifts, whether that's an 8 or a 12, or weekends only, or whatever we can do to accommodate and to make sure that we're giving that flexibility. We've also spent a lot of time trying to incentivize everybody differently. And in our model at Chapters, we um, make sure that, oftentimes it's common that you see a buy-in fee or a, one-time admission fee. We take all those dollars aside in our underwriting, and every 60 day we pay that out to our hourly associates. So long as we have two move-ins of 4.5 or greater on Google and no complaint surveys. So we're trying to do things like that. We're doing something similar with our benefits, and trying to do different things that give them value and that ownership of the building. And we've seen a pretty nice shift, as well as our competitors and the industry as a whole is doing better labor. So you're seeing the agencies starting to cancel shifts, and so we've seen a nice uptick in applicants that are actually coming from the agencies over. But we have a long way to go, and I don't think it's ever going to be stable. We have to just constantly find different niches and ways to engage and reward our associates to keep them, to retain them as long as we can.
Doesn't sound like it's just one thing to solve a massive problem. It's going to be a series of many things, and probably many small things. Jonathan, from your perspective, what solutions have you guys come up with to solve and mitigate the current labor challenge, particularly at your properties in Australia?
Yeah, great question. And I agree with both you and Danny that it is absolutely an area of core focus, major importance, and at times challenge. So I guess I'll share with one structural thing that we've done, and then I'll give you some other points as well in terms of some other ideas that I've got. One structural thing that we've embedded in our business is that we don't use any agency team members. Now, that's a commitment for us that's been a big challenge to uphold. But what we felt was that it is very hard to deliver on your promise when an agency team member is going to get a call in the morning to say, could you come and fill a shift? And possibly never be back in that location ever again, never having any contact with a resident again, having not received the training that for us is so critical. And so what we embedded within our organization is an idea called the self-accountable roster. So each house has a house or location has a house manager, and they have a core team. And that core team needs to form and really bond as a team. And in bonding and forming as a team, they need to help each other out during sickness or during times when they need to fill shifts. Now, what that does is that forms an incredible amount of camaraderie and an incredible amount of loyalty around helping one another out, knowing that our true commitment is that we will not use an agency team member to fill a shift. Now, obviously, in extreme circumstances of illness or accident, then we'll step in and support that team by bringing in team members from one of our other locations if need be. But in general, that promise is upheld. And we found that that's had a big impact. The other thing that we've done is that we have, in terms of our structures, that we've completely turned our org chart upside down. And while it might sound a little bit cheesy, our residents are at the top, and our front row care team members are really at the top of our org chart, and everybody else in the organization, including myself, is there to help support them to do the incredible work that they do. And they genuinely feel a sense of being revered and being celebrated as being the most important people in our organization. Now, what that also translates to is an incredible amount of investment in them, training, recognition, development opportunities. But the core thing that I think makes a difference is that by elevating these team members to the top of our org chart, we've given them an opportunity to have a career pathway. And what we find drives that retention is that in typical, call it organizations in the sector, they're at the bottom of the chart and they don't really have a huge career pathway because generally the registered nurses and some of the other roles seem to accelerate past them in terms of leadership positions. And what we've done is we've made sure that those front row care team members have career pathways and see promotion. So some of our leaders now in our organization are those people that started off with us as a carer and have just grown and soaked up every opportunity. And we've seen that has had a big impact, not just on the team inside in the organization, but in terms of our reputation of them telling their friends and other team members who now want to join and be part of what we're doing.
That's great. I like the team approach to building the roster. So I may be answering my next question for you, Jonathan, but talk to me about how you're getting people, your employees, into the property. What ideas have you found work to whether you're opening a new location, or you buy a new location, or you're replacing team members? What are the one or two tools that you found best to attract the talent? And I'm guessing it's probably going to revolve around referrals, as the team approach is important for you.
So great guess, and that would be point one that I would share is a referral program. The other element that's core to our strategy is that we partner with local training organisations who need to provide placements for their students in order to receive their practical experience, in order to graduate for their certificates or whatever career program they're on. And so what we do is it's almost a try before you buy process, where we get these students coming in that volunteer effectively through their placement. We get to see the shining stars, and we're very quick to make offers to those team members to then join our team.
Okay, good. Danny, what about you with that question in regards to one or two things you're doing to attract talent to fill those open positions, not on agency?
Yeah. So similar to Jonathan, but I would add to, we've structured ourselves to be extremely fast when a new associate applies for one of our open positions. So we have a recruiting team that strives and is measured on making contact within 1 hour of completed application. And we've also made our application process extremely fast and easy to make sure that people aren't spending hours on a computer trying to apply for an open position. So speed is very important for us right now. And as you all know, I mean, it's very common that somebody needs to work, within 5 business days when they do apply. So we built our entire talent application system around that, and we've got a great partner in Paylocity, and we use that from pre-hire to retirement, the full suite, and focus a lot of time and energy on that front end and that first 7 days of their experience. It's usually when you see the turnover starting in week 2. So.
Good. A common theme with both of you. Neither of you mentioned salary and wages. And I think that has become a theme that during the pandemic, there was a push for higher wages. And we moved kind of the bar on maybe average wages for certain positions. And neither of you mentioned that. And I think we've also found that to be true, that it's far more than just the salary. That goes into maintaining staffing and a culture and a team environment to attract, keep, and retain talent. So moving on to maybe another hot topic, and Danny, I'll start with you, the debt markets. And with interest rates increasing, I think we're finding that lending is becoming a little bit more challenging. Lenders that historically have been lending on seniors housing, maybe rethinking where they want to invest their capital, how they want to invest, who they want to invest with. How has the lending market affected you, and what are you seeing as maybe the key changes over the last 6 months? And what do you kind of foresee for the next 6 months in the debt markets if someone is using debt to finance a property?
Yes. Great question. We could have a whole nother hour dialogue on, I think. So kind of two short answers to that. One, as to your comment around banks and lenders not perhaps lending in seniors, we have found there's a decent percentage that certainly didn't have their investments pay off, mostly driven by the pandemic. And some of them have been instructed, by their boards and others to kind of pull back a little bit and wait. On the flip side of that, those that have weathered that storm and have a lot of experience in senior housing, we've seen more success with. We just closed on a revolving line of credit, for example, during these times, and have a lender there that is very specialized in seniors and had a very, frankly, smooth process. So that's kind of part one on how we see the debt. The other part of that is where we chapters are finding debt, and we partnered on 5 of our 7 properties with REITs with a 3-year option to purchase. So essentially, having a lease rate in lieu of an interest-only period, and having that purchase option starting in year 3. So we've kind of gotten around it a little bit as well with 5 of our 7 properties.
Okay. I will add my 2 cents that our approach has really not changed over the last year, and that we have traditionally financed our projects, whether development or acquisition, with a lot of regional lenders, not necessarily national, but regional, whether they're local to where a property may be located, or they're in and around Dallas or Texas, and they're willing to travel with us out of state. The last deal we closed was with another YPO member who is president, CEO of a bank. And again, it's a small regional lender. And we just found that regional lenders, credit unions have capital. They like to lend, and they're very relationship oriented. We have found that deposits are now the discussion amongst our lenders and banks, as they all would also like to have primary depository relationships with them. So I think for me, that is a theme, is that deposits are more important, and it's not just about making a loan, but what kind of deposits can we bring to our banking or lending partners as well. Jonathan, kind of the same question for you. And I know your financing structure, capitalization may be a little bit different, but tell us about kind of the debt markets and how you're capitalizing your properties and how you're thinking about the debt markets and your business.
Sure. So I guess the nature of the lending environment in Australia is a little bit different in that it's concentrated with a number of 4 large banks, a few other lenders, but at the end of the day, you don't necessarily have that same opportunity in the US, where you've got much deeper breadth of capital markets with the regional lending opportunities and smaller credit unions and things like that. That being said, what's helped us in terms of the lending environment is because there's a strong alternate use for our properties, and that we're buying a traditional home in a traditional suburb, and the bank can see that partly as lending to a aged care business, but partly as alternate use in the worst case scenario, that home can just go back on the market and resell as a residential property. We're able to get more attractive rates than I'd say a traditional business lending arrangement, and that's helped us in terms of our scale and our cost of capital as we've grown. Obviously, rising interest rate environment and inflationary pressures here as well, very similar to what's been going on in the US. But nevertheless, we're kind of always slightly, I guess, discounted to what you'd say would be a traditional rate that the sector would get.
Let's take that same theme of capitalization. We talked about debt. Danny, for you on the equity side, what are you finding in the current market is important for equity investors in the senior living space? And how have you seen that maybe change the nature of equity over the last 6 months?
So we spend a lot of time with our equity partners getting them in alignment with our strategy first, probably more so than in the past, and making sure that they feel comfortable that we've done our homework on the opportunity, that here's the tactical things we're going to do to have a different outcome, and here's why we think this market makes sense. And doing those 3 things well, it allows them to get more comfortable with the investment and be confident in the return projections. So it's been more dialogue, I would say, up front, just given the competition we have for equity right now. And then the last point I would say too is it's been helpful that we've been very focused on right now in our version 1.0 of chapters, the value add acquisition, and we try to find the investors that have experience with value add type approaches. So that's helped us in those conversations and planning.
Okay. Jonathan, what about you from an equity perspective? What are you finding in the markets currently?
Yeah, I'd say it's relatively similar to what Danny said. The thing that I would add is that, um, we spoke at the beginning about this aging demographic, and I think the nature of the trends associated with the sector make it very attractive still for equity holders or equity investors. And so there's still, for those that are aligned with our strategy and really think we're onto a level of innovation and doing something different, there's a strong commitment that over the next few years, that growth trajectory will continue and that those returns will therefore be there. So I think that for the right organizations in the sector, the fact that there's this additional, call it, demographic trend to support the sector, I think means that there's strong interest for the right stories.
Let's switch to your current strategies. And McFarlin is currently focused on acquisition of distressed properties. We feel like we can buy for less than we can build, and particularly we are focused on buying non-performing loans or buying distressed properties pre or through bankruptcy process. Um, Jonathan, what is your current growth strategy? Is it to buy or to build? And kind of why are you building your strategy around that?
Yes, our strategy is very much focused on build, on the basis that because our format is quite unique, finding opportunities to buy are not as prevalent as maybe in some of the more traditional areas of the sector. And so it's about ensuring that we create a level of critical mass or a neighborhood around a series of homes in areas where we see strong demand, and therefore that's our predominant strategy of essentially building and ensuring that as we scale, we've got all the support for growth.
And what is your long-term strategy as you're building a portfolio of properties? Kind of what is the strategy over the long term?
Look, it's a great question. And I guess having worked in banking and worked with a lot of clients there around exits, my philosophy is a little bit different to that in the sense that I think if you've got a good, solid business that's performing really well, the exit will take care of itself. So we don't have a particular exit in mind other than the fact that we're continuing to see strong demand. We continue to see there opportunities for new locations for us to expand, and therefore, from a strategic standpoint, we see ourselves just pursuing that, and the rest hopefully will come at the right time in the right place.
Good. Danny, what about you, the buy versus build, and how you built your strategy around that and why?
Yep. So we're a little bit of a hybrid in that the markets that we're going after throughout the Midwest, we're acquiring to eventually build within. And we really target communities, like I said earlier, between 50 and 80 units. So oftentimes, small to mid-size properties as standalone in a market can be challenging, especially labor-wise, longer term. I mean, simple example, in Chicago, we have two properties, 30 minutes apart. Saturday, we had a chef call in. We luckily had another chef at the other property full time that was off for the day, so we could fill a shift. And that sounds small, but you extrapolate, you multiply that over, proper or 7 properties throughout the Midwest, and it has an impact when we can have more than one community in a single market. So we do a lot of homework, as I said earlier, on the market studies and the current occupancies, and we like to target those specific suburbs where we eventually want to put a 60 unit AL memory care site. So it's a little bit of a hybrid for us. And then I think to your question, long term, we look at deals and markets from a minimum of a 15-year period. So we want to go into markets thinking longer term, that this is sustainable and growing, and less about a short 3 to 5 year exit. And on the 15-year view, a lot of what we focus on is a recapitalization through a refinance or a permanent debt structure solution.
Okay. We talked a little bit about geography, and Danny, I heard you say that synergy is important, like to have properties in similar vicinity so that you can have synergy in operations and share resources. Jonathan, as you're building, how are you thinking about geography and synergy as you build your portfolio of companies?
Very consistent to Danny in the sense that we have a strong respect for geography. Distances can be great in Australia, and so ensuring that we've got the ability to effectively, as we grow, manage the organisation and be close to each location and what might come up in terms of their needs, either team or resident or family related, has been really important for us. So we're very conscious about not pushing that growth path too quickly, such that the geography then gets much harder to manage. And if we reflect back on COVID, we were really grateful that we were within a very concentrated geographic position, because as planes got grounded and movement became a bit more challenging during lockdowns, it was much easier to manage the complexities of a pandemic when you had that level of proximity. Now we have our sights on growing further, but what that will then mean is ensuring that we've got enough talent and leadership in each of those locations, such that we don't necessarily need to race there at a senior level in order to triage a situation.
Jonathan, in Australia, talk to us about the supply-demand relationship. Is there a shortage of seniors housing in Australia? Has there been an overbuilding? Talk to us a little bit about kind of where you see the supply-demand shaking up in Australia.
Yeah, so look, the sector has been largely very much supported and funded by government funding, and that government funding has come under increasing pressure as the costs for operators have gone up, and the quality has not necessarily been maintained. So there was a major, what we call, royal commission into the quality of the care that was offered and what that looks like. One of the things is, as you've mentioned, is there is a shortage, in the sense that if you project out the call it size of the population that's going to need care and the number of beds available, there is a shortage. And so what the government strategy has been, given that they're a core funder of the system, has been to focus or invest more in home care, on the basis that if people move into care later and they can be supported in their home through government services and funding, then that essentially will reduce the number of beds that are required in the system longer term. And so that's been the bigger picture, call it, approach. The other thing that's important to recognise, that's probably quite different to the US, is that the labour market here is much more heavily regulated and got a much more significant or higher minimum wage. And so what happened as part of wanting to attract talent for the broader sector, what the government has recently done, coming the 1st of July, is increase the minimum wage by 15%. Now that has a massive impact on the sector. They are funding a big portion of that increase, but nevertheless, what it's hoping to do is improve the, call it, demand side of workers wanting to enter the sector in order to hopefully be attracted by the increased wages.
Thank you. Danny, Jonathan had brought up a pandemic lesson learned with synergy during the pandemic, created some solutions for sharing staff and resources and probably supplies and other things. As a question from an audience guest, what are some of the takeaways that you and your team learned from this pandemic that maybe could be applied towards future unforeseen events, whether it's a pandemic or some other unforeseen event? What are some takeaways that your business is considering going forward?
Yeah, great question. And just to reiterate, the importance of the staffing synergy is so key for us as operators to, as a lesson learned, to be able to cover shifts when somebody has to be, at home for a long period of time to recover from said illness. So that's certainly one takeaway, and that's also why it's very important for us in chapters as we go out and grow to find pockets where we can go into a new market with at least two properties, and that's COVID certainly one of the drivers of that. We've also not taking our eye off the ball on all things infection control and supply management. And we've set up all of our contracts with our GPO and medical supply vendors to make sure that we're getting supplies as local as possible. And so we have in our 7 communities, I think we have 3 different food vendors as an example, but all of them are within a close proximity to our community. Same with supplies, as well as our all of our contracts. We try to stay as close to that market as possible, just to get those services in a timely fashion.
Okay. Jonathan, what about you? Some post-pandemic reflections and best practices for future events?
Yeah, look, the one takeaway that I would mention, in addition to what Danny said and what we've spoken about earlier, is the need for a level of flexibility and, I guess, care and warmth when it comes to the impact that these pandemics can have on those receiving care. So Australia, obviously, being quite a regulated market, got relatively strict around visitation, around the need for lockdowns, and effectively all in the with the motivation to manage infection control. What we saw quite strongly is that for someone living with dementia and for a lot of residents living at the end stage of that process or that journey, needing that level of family contact and that family care really made a difference and had a strong impact when it was removed. And so finding ways with managing risk to be dignified about how people can still kind of maintain that connection. Because I think in the early parts of the pandemic, I think the pendulum swung a little bit too far in terms of the impact that had on our cohort. And therefore we worked quite hard to move it back towards what we felt was more natural and more consistent with our philosophy.
Okay. Switching to sales trends, and I sense that both of you have a long-term focus with your business, and and that the market may dictate how you craft an exit strategy. But sales volume was historically low in 2022. And I believe part of that was buyer and seller disconnect on pricing. So, Danny, what do you see as the biggest reason for that disconnect between buyers and sellers and really matching price point, which resulted in low volume in 2022?
It is certainly an ongoing challenge from a acquirer's view. How we've approached that to get into closer into alignment is we've been extremely transparent with our underwriting model, which encapsulates all things operationally tied to the debt structure, tied to the LP and GP returns. So as we're trying to work a deal all the way through on either a price per unit, it's really hard to do a cap rate right now, and some of the trailing 6s and trailing 12s. So when we look at a price per unit, occupied versus unoccupied, that transparent approach has really helped us get alignment faster, and then people understand how we're getting to a respective number. So that's one way we've tried to tackle that. Certainly do not, it's common that I hear from a broker, met with one this morning, and it's quick that, hey, we need $9 million for this property, but by the time you're done talking to them, well, 8 would probably be okay. So there's still a pretty wide range of I think disconnect from seller and buyer, and brokers are trying to kind of navigate that journey as well.
Yeah, I think I'm also finding that many deals are not transacting. And I think from my perspective, the disconnect between buyers and sellers may ultimately compress, but I think sellers or owners need to feel more pain in order to soften their price to meet what buyers are willing to pay. So for us, it's about patience. As we've learned, you make your money on the buy, not the sell. Jonathan, talk to us a little bit about the market in Australia, and do you feel there's a similar buyer-seller disconnect? Why that is, and what do you think happens the balance of this year?
Sure. So our sector was in a fair holding pattern for a period of time as there was a level of uncertainty around this Royal Commission. and what recommendations were going to come out of that Royal Commission and what the funding implications were going to be, which then would translate directly into a level of profitability for a number of the operators. Since that report's been published, there's been some transactions, and what we've seen effectively is a consolidation. So larger players are looking to scoop up more and effectively generate further scale. And what we've seen is some of those smaller operators are finding it increasingly difficult without that scale to make their model work, and therefore either exiting the market or looking for opportunities to be acquired.
Danny, any other thoughts and strategies as we kind of near the hour here in regards to best practices, themes, or key takeaways you'd want to leave with the audience?
Yeah, we've geared our new company to be structured around, our property level leader. So in the States, typically you hear that phrase, be executive director. We call ours chief experience officers, and we really treat them as peer CEOs and really franchise owners. And, we're seeing a lot of momentum as we go out and recruit, those leaders, because ultimately for us to be successful, I'm based out of St. Louis and we have properties throughout the Midwest. Really that empowerment of that site leader is really important, and also to make sure that we're on the same page around what success looks like from a quality, service, reputation, and overall financial health of the organization, but giving them that autonomy, to really drive that local business has been key for us. And, we're excited to continue our growth path and see a lot of opportunities in light of the challenging debt and finance market. But for us, those local leaders are so critical to our success.
Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, I echo actually what Danny said in that, when I reflect back on our org chart and who we put at the front row and how much we revere them, I completely concur. The other thing I'd say is that it's a hugely gratifying and satisfying sector to be in, and the impact that you have on every single family is so significant when you think that they're coming at a real time of need, and that care and that nurturing and that warmth that you can offer them in order to ensure that portion of their, call it, experience with their parent or their loved one really matters and makes a difference. And so we take that privilege really, really seriously. And I think, we can talk a lot about the business opportunities and the financial opportunities, which obviously are there. But at the end of the day, there's a core kind of focus, I think, that needs to be for every operator around the impact that you're having on people's lives and their families. And that shouldn't be taken lightly.
Yeah, thank you. Jonathan, there may be listeners that are leaders, entrepreneurs, but are learning about YPO. So as a member of YPO, could you talk a little bit about the benefits that you and your family have enjoyed as being a member of YPO, and what other business leaders could expect to gain from belonging to an organization like YPO?
Sure. So I'm a relative newbie in that I've been part of YPO for just over a year. And the thing that I think has been the most transformative is that we often, have heard the adage that leadership can be lonely, and yet being part of a network like this creates such a level of connection with people that are experiencing similar things across different sectors that has been really, really valuable for me. I'd say one of the most powerful experiences as well has been Forum. I haven't seen that level of trust operate so quickly amongst a new group of people. And so for those who aren't familiar with Forum, Forum is a group that you get very close to and meet with on a monthly basis. And I'd say one of the unique elements of YPO for a leader that really can be incredibly transformative in terms of the connections that you can make and the advice you can get.
Danny, what about you?
Yeah, I'll echo the Forum. I mean, for me, when we, I've been a YPO for almost 3 years, and from initial conversation about me leaving where I was to actually doing it, in August, it was quite a journey, and the Forum was certainly a huge piece of that path for me, and having a group that are very open and honest with one another, kind of vet the opportunity to do something different, to start something new, and that was vital for my decision path. Here as I started Chapters Living in August. I think the other thing that I value a ton is the events. I mean, being able to go to the events that are all planned out for you, and especially as busy as we are, and not have to really think about all the coordination of everything. We've really enjoyed the events, and from not only from like my wife and I, but also our kids have really enjoyed the events and the ease that it has on our family and our time.
Good. Thank you all for sharing. I think we could all echo the forum experience, and I'd encourage anyone to go to ypo.org, where you can gain more information, particularly about forum, which is a key foundational element to YPO. Jonathan, Danny, thank you all for sharing your experience. Thank you all those who attended as part of this conversation. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with your friends and followers. Repost on Twitter and LinkedIn, so that you can also subscribe and gain future YPO Presents Ask the Experts. So thank you all for watching. We appreciate your time. And Jonathan, Danny, thank you for sharing your experience.
Thank you, Matt.